So out of the 8 200-watt solar panels that we ordered, we've received 7 of them. One went to, is in Troutdale, Oregon right now. So these originated in Southern California. They went past us and is taking the scenic route. And out of the 7, they all had an open circuit voltage of like, and it's very smoky here, and so it's inside the building, just the skylights, and it should be open circuit voltage 24.3, but inside, like I said, on a very smoky day with just what's coming through the skies, we were getting like 16.5 volts to 16.85 until we got to one, and that's this one, and it was putting out half as much as the others. So I had an idea that there was an issue that hopefully could be easily resolved, and we pulled off the cover, and sure enough, you can see soldered. You got your diodes and no solder. So much for their quality control. Unless it was touching enough that they were getting a reading when it left, and in shipment it lost it. But anyway, this actually was bent a little bit. I made it a little bit closer, but anyway, if I can hold the camera steady. So anyway, that's the issue. This one right here needs to be soldered. To show you another one just for reference, you can see soldered. Really crappy soldered joints. I checked to make sure that was solid right there, and it almost doesn't look like that one's soldered. So not overly impressed with the quality. But we'll solder that and then move on. We gotta figure out how to mount these, and we're gonna mount them in pairs, and they're, does it have the weight on here? Yeah, they're 26.5 pounds each. So we gotta put 2 of them together lengthwise like this, only they'll be together. And so we're going to put a piece across each end to strengthen that, and a small 90 piece of aluminum. We don't want to add any more weight to this overall project, but we've got to have that rigidity so that these panels can be in pairs, and they're going to be supported in pairs. They're going to glide in pairs, and so we'll show you all that. And just wanted to let you know the status of received. Hopefully this other panel is received soon and without damage. So let's take a look at the solar components that are inside the back of the Doka here. So what you don't see are the batteries, and they'll go right here behind the passenger seat. They'll sit approximately 11.5 inches high and approximately 12 inches long. So right here, and they sit out 8 inches, which is about the same as the inverter you see sitting here. So this is a pure sine wave inverter. It's 4,000 watts, 8,000 surge. Right here we have the solar charge controller. It's a 60 amp controller, and we have a 60 amp circuit breaker right there. You'll see that we're going to be using that as a switch. This is what's going to switch the power on and off from our solar panels, so we can disconnect the panels from the solar charge controller. We have a JLD 404 right here that will monitor the current in and out, so we'll know the state of charge of our batteries. And we have a little push button switch here, which will just show that it's not to show anything, it's to turn on and off the power to the JLD 404. So when the system's not being used, we don't have the drain off our 12 volt battery from the JLD 404. So that's what you see. So this is the driver's seat all the way back, doesn't go any further back, so we're not interfering with any of those components. We have a grommet there. We've got 4 gland nuts here where our battery cabling will go, and this is a keyed switch right here that will disconnect the battery pack from everything else. So this disconnects 12 volts from the JLD 404. This disconnects the battery pack, the solar battery pack, which will be a 24 volt setup. That's what disconnects it from everything. So we've got a switch that disconnects the power from basically the inverter, and we've got a switch that disconnects the power coming in from the solar array from the charge controller. And this allows us to turn on the charge controller first. You should always connect power from the batteries to the solar charge controller first. So we do that by turning this on. So we want to monitor all the energy in and out, so we would push that button, which you'll see in a later video when we have everything installed and working. That turns on our JLD 404, and it has memory, so that it won't lose what our current state of charge is. We turn that on. We turn on the solar battery pack, and that then will send power to both the inverter and the solar charge controller. The inverter has a separate switch, and so the inverter won't be on it until we turn it on here, but it would have the 24 volts going to it. But as soon as we turn on this switch, our solar charge controller will come on, and of course it will show that there's no solar input until we flip that switch, and that will then send the energy from the solar panels to our solar charge controller into our battery pack. And then if we have any AC loads, such as we want to charge this vehicle, then we would turn on the inverter. Okay, so that's what you can see. Let me show you what is underneath here, but I have to move the seat forward to do that. So sliding the seat forward, you can see there's a little bit of storage under there, just like there was on the passenger side. On the passenger side, there's your 12 volt auxiliary battery here. That's the stock location from the factory. And then in that front area, we have our DC to DC converter. So now we'll open up this panel. We haven't done any of the wiring yet, just showing you the components at this point. So we have our switch is the back side of the switch right there, and our main disconnect switch for the batteries, and then it comes through this braided interconnect to this fuse right here. That's our main system fuse, and then it's going to go from there to this other fuse. This is the fuse between the solar charge controller and the battery pack. And then we have our shunt down here, which will connect to the JLD 404, and that's going to measure all of our energy in and out of our batteries, which is what we're going to care about. Now, the panels are also fused, and so we have 8 panels, and they're in 2 groups of 4. And so we're running 48 volts. And so we're going to have 2 48-volt strings. And so each 48-volt string will have its own inline fuse. And then when those are combined, we'll also have a fuse on that line. So we kind of, you know, I've always said fuses are your friend. So we've kind of got a little overkill. Everything is protected. It protects the panels, it protects the components, it protects the batteries, protects our wiring, everything. So we're going to have some wiring go through here from the solar charge controller. This is going to be these 4 battery in, battery out. These will come from the 2 batteries, and this will come, you know, from our switch and our shunt and go down here to our inverter. So we'll show you that as soon as I get that hooked up. Can't show you the batteries at this point, but maybe later in this video, because we don't have them yet. We're still waiting on them. So that's what it's going to look like in the back of the car. Basically, you know, just in from the door here a little bit, it's going to be consumed with our solar stuff. And on the inverter here, and once everything's up and operable, we'll show it to you. Here's you know, connections so that we could run you know, 120 volt AC to whatever, hardwire it, and we have 4 15 amp plugs right there. So you can see it says maximum 1500 watts per outlet, which basically is normal for a 15 amp, you know, 120 volt circuit. So anyway, there's also a USB port right there. So anyway, that's what's going on so far on the control part of our solar. And once we can move the vehicle out of the shop here, we'll show you this solar array part. Don't know if that's part of this video or not, because these things are filmed and, you know, they're not done in sequence. So it just depends on when we get things and what we can do. We're still waiting on the motor to move the transporter, and basically don't have the clearances in the shop here to open the solar array. So we'll wait till we get the motor and we can drive it out and drive it back in the shop. These are the batteries that we're going to be using in the Doka for the solar setup. We ordered 2 of the SOK lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're a 12 volt battery, 206 amp hours each. We're going to put them in series, so we're going to have 24 volts, 206 amp hours. And before we put them in series, we're going to have to put them in parallel, because we want them to have the exact same state of charge. And so when you put them in parallel, they would automatically, you know, seek a balanced level. But if you just went and put them in series without doing that first, one's going to have, you know, less of a state of charge than the other, and you don't want that. So we're going to install them in the vehicle and use them for determining our wire links and do all that. And then we're going to set them on the workbench, connect them in parallel, and let them sit for a few days so that they will seek their level. Now, little unboxing here. It came double boxed. So this was, you know, nice heavy outer box, and then there's an inner box, and inside the inner box there is a nice thick styrofoam, and so it is actually centered in this styrofoam, and you can see it's quite thick, so it's nicely insulated against any shipping abuse. Pull it out of the box. It's got these nice handles, which are nice for portability. Maybe not the most convenient thing when you're trying to put two of them end to end, like what we're going to do. Side to side would be no issue. So this keeps us about the same width as the inverter, and so that's why we're going to run them lengthwise. They have a screw terminal here, and we'll show you the orientation once we get in the vehicle. These are on paper a pretty nice offering. They're supposed to be serviceable. You can remove the top. We're not going to do that in this video, and there are others that have done this. We won't do it at all. But you have access to the electronics as well as the cells to replace the cells, which shouldn't be an issue if they're using quality cells. We've never replaced a cell, and we've used thousands of them. So lithium iron phosphate cells are pretty much bulletproof, and so they're the safest chemistry out there. They have long life cycles, a lot of life cycles. They're just a very robust battery. This is the other side of the battery. The last one we pulled out, it was facing the other direction. So you can see it's a 12.8 volt, 206 amp hour, which is a 2,636 watt hour. Volts times amps equals watts. And it's got the regular disclaimers: risk of fire, explosion, or burns, do not incinerate, crush, blah blah blah. Here's a little more important part: recommended charge voltage, maximum charge current, and then the recommended discharge current. And in our application, we should be within those parameters, and we'll talk about those later, if not in this video, in another video. But let's, like I said, let's go put these in the vehicle and see how they're going to sit and hook up. This is the schematic for our Volkswagen Transporter Doka solar setup. So you can see we have 8 solar panels right here. These are each 200 watts apiece, and we have 2 parallel strings, and the individual strings are in series. So we have 4 panels in series, another 4 panels in series, and they're parallel. And each series string has an inline 15 amp fuse, and then it goes to the to an Anderson connector, which then connects to our solar charge controller through a switch. We're using a circuit breaker as a switch, and then the solar charge controller is connected to our battery pack. These are 2 12-volt lithium iron phosphate 206 amp hour SOK batteries, and it's connected through a 60 amp fuse, and we have a disconnect switch that allows us to disconnect our batteries from everything else. We also have an inverter. It's a 4,000 watt continuous pure sine wave inverter, and it's connected to our battery pack through a 300 amp fuse. And then on the negative leg, of course, we have our shunt, and the shunt is what is providing the current reading to our JLD 404, which is monitoring the voltage of our battery pack and the current in and out of the battery pack. Battery pack up here, not the solar array. And so it's just a convenient way to look at a glance, large display. we can look at the solar charge controller and know, what's going on a little bit. But anyway, that's what we have. Let's take a look at it in the vehicle. So we'll show you the wiring here underneath the driver's seat panel. And you can see where we're coming in. Let's see if I can hold this panel up, hold the camera, point things out. So right here is where we're coming in, our positive from our batteries. Goes through the switch, through this braided interconnect to the 300 amp fuse. That's our fuse for our inverter. And there's a jumper that brings it across here to this 30 amp fuse for our solar charge controller. Then the other side of things, so again, like I said, this goes to the inverter right here, this goes to the solar charge controller. And then coming out of the inverter, we have a line going here, and we have a line coming out of the solar charge controller right here, this 6-gauge black wire. The double-aught one's coming out of the inverter. And so this is the negative side of our battery pack on the other side of the shunt. Of course, these two wires feed up here to our JLD 404. We have a line here, the JLD 404, that is coming off the pack voltage down here. And we just have our switch and light right there. So that's it. Let's take a look from a different angle here. So here's the setup in the rear of the cab of the Doka. You can see we have all this room empty. It's just inside the door here, just a little bit. And so without the seat there, the main walk area is going to be right here anyway, or loading area. I just have them sitting there right now. I think we're going to strap them in place. I waited till we received the batteries before I made that decision, but I think we'll just have a girth strap and then one that goes over the top and just ratchet those things down. So as you can see here, we have the batteries wired in series. Here's the most positive, the negative to the positive of this one, our most negative. And so the most positive and most negative go into what we looked at just a moment ago under the seat. And so what we have here then is an Anderson connector, and that would be used to connect the solar panels. And for now, we're just going to bring the solar panel line through the window and plug in. Whether or not we run through the back of the vehicle here kind of thing, I don't really want to run through the window for now. Don't like drilling holes. So anyway, this is the solar input. This is our switch for the solar input. We're actually using a circuit breaker for the switch. So that allows us to disconnect the solar panels from the system through a switch. So solar panel in goes through the switch and then down here to our solar charge controller. And then the negative side comes up here and goes into the box here, which connected to the shunt, which I showed you a moment ago. Coming out of the fuse goes to the positive of the inverter, negative of the inverter went up and went to the shunt. These are the inlets for the battery. Okay, and this is our switch. JLD 404 on, no amps. We'll turn on our switch here. And when we do, our solar charge controller comes on and it's showing, I think if I just press anything, the light comes on. Yep. There we go. So it shows 26.1 volts. and it's ready to roll. So of course there was no solar in with that. Let's take a look at that again. So since we don't have the solar panels hooked up, no solar coming in, it's just battery out. And so we turned on the battery, so that turned on our solar charge controller. You always connect your battery to the solar charge controller first, then we would switch our solar on. So let's turn on the inverter, and it's button right here. Hold it on a second, I guess. There we go. It's on. It shows a little different reading than the solar charge controller. It's showing 25.8 volts, and this was 26.1, I think it was. Yeah, 26.1. Let's see what our JLD 404 shows. It shows 26.1 also. So with just the inverter on, we're only drawing 0.2 of an amp. So let's plug in a couple things and see what it does. Well, let's just plug in one thing. We'll plug in a heat gun, because it's at high and low. We'll take a look at that. Here's my heat gun. Let's get over here where we can see the display. I'm going to turn it on low first. There it is on low. You can see we're pulling 33 amps. We'll switch it to high. 62 amps. And we could do the math and figure out the watts. Okay. So that's the system tested, with the exception of the solar. We still need to check the solar, and we're going to do that after we I want to balance the cells like I mentioned before. Haven't done that yet. We just hooked them up to test things. And let me turn this off. Turn the inverter off, and you can see our draw goes back down to 0. And so what's going to be interesting is to see what happens once we have the solar put in or connected. And so like I said, this was just the initial test. I'm going to pull these batteries out, hook them up in parallel, and then we'll wait for the motor to get in, install the motor in this thing, and then we can get rolling, pull this thing out of the warehouse here, expand our solar out, and see what we're doing. You can see with this heat gun on high, we're pulling more than we'd ever be able to put in with the solar. Well, this is the setup in the vehicle, now complete. There's our two SOK batteries. You said 206 amp hours each, and they're connected in series. And so we have a 24 volt lithium iron phosphate battery pack. That's the setup in the back of our Doka. So we still have plenty of room to throw tools and stuff, whatever you want to haul in this thing. But this is basically designed to be able to haul tools, go to a work site, and have all the power that you need, because it's being replenished by solar. No separate charger in this setup, because we've got 1600 watts of solar, and we think we'll get by just fine.